and we'll do that till noon, and then you two guys have readings, and I've got a couple of other readings if folks show up. So the panel is using the Greater Hamilton area as a setting, and all of us pretty much have done that in some way or another. I know that Love, Time, Space, and Magic, which was through Pop Seagull Publishing, which is Liz's baby. I did a story that actually centered very heavily in Hamilton and incorporated the art crawl as part of it. And I'm just going to go, and I think I'll just treat everybody as a panelist since there's only 7 of us here. And I'll just ask, okay, Kathy, how have you used Hamilton, the GHA as a setting, and can you name an advantage to what to doing so? And you need to unmute yourself.
I have not used Hamilton very much. It was sort of a flyby moment in one of my books where a person got stuck in Buffalo. It's fantasy that I write. Lucifer the bad guy has come in and decimated downtown Toronto with dragons and gargoyles and so on. And
as it should be.
Yes. And
so it's nonfiction.
That sounds more interesting than what downtown Toronto actually is.
But of course, modes of transportation at this point in time have got disrupted, and the fellow actually makes it to Buffalo, but he wants to make it to Toronto, and he manages to catch a bus to Hamilton, and all the car rentals are gone, and the bus takes him to the airport, and there's nothing that he can find, no one who's willing to go to Toronto until he finds a air transit driver, a young fellow who's in debt up to his eyeballs. And he offers him an exorbitant amount of money to take him to Toronto. So Hamilton was just a passing moment in the story.
Okay. Well, Mark, Red Hill Creek, obviously you've used the setting quite a lot.
That's right. And I guess I took it from the opposite end. I specifically wanted to write a book about Hamilton and set in the city. And that posed a few questions for how I would go about it. And one thing is that it's really, when you think about it, a pretty big place with a long history. So short of writing a Ken Follett style 800,000 page epic, what I wanted to do was take a fairly tightly focused look at one period, and I tried to depict some sections of the city, but because of where the characters were living, I ended up doing a lot of it in the East End, while still trying to have them move around the city. So that was one consideration, is just how to approach that. And the other one that I really ended up thinking about a fair bit was how to leave space for the actual story rather than writing about the city. And it got to a point where I was probably leaving a lot more space to describe things around Hamilton while still trying to tell the story. And I wanted to do it as more than a kind of nostalgia trip to what I remembered growing up in. And also I wanted to avoid what I think is a trap when you write about a place of doing kind of lists of name checks, just naming different places, different locations. So trying to get more at the feeling of what it was like in the city in a certain period, and it is really a question of balance. And what I ended up doing was relying a lot on the characters and how they would experience things. The book is basically a narration by a fellow who's looking back after a period of about 50 years at a certain time in his life. And I more or less went by the seat of the pants, just imagining what he would remember and how he would put it in what he's writing down. So it posed some technical questions like that, but in the end, I was happy that I did manage to write at least what I remembered about the city in the mid 1950s, late 50s,
Mhm.
which is in some ways not really what a person would see if they were visiting or living in Hamilton right now. But I think there's a certain spirit around the city that's really been there for a long time. It is a definite place with definite ways of living and thinking. And I think that comes through no matter what part of the city you're writing about or in what period.
Recent history. If Hamilton were Ottawa, there would be truckers in the ditch. Elizabeth, how have you used Hamilton?
Yes. So in The Ground That Grows Roses, initially in the first book of the series of The Singing Bone, Denny is from St. Catharines, but she kind of moves through Hamilton to get where she's going. She goes up north. But in the second book, essentially she's become a national hero, but they need some time for the ruckus to die down around what happened with her in the first book. And so they sent her and her love interest Wayne and her aunt Verity to live in Hamilton for a while because Wayne is from Hamilton. And so it was really fun because I got to do a near future Hamilton where we had some of the great things about Hamilton still like reflected there, but also I got to pump up the urban decay and add some, science fictional elements. Like for instance, it's either electric vehicles for the most part, or people have just gone back to horse carts. In some instances, they've retrofitted old truck backs and stuff to just go with a horse cart. So the buses are all electrical and make this sort of strange, mournful tune that everyone will be able to pick out, so they don't run anybody over, and you can hear them better with the electric motors in them. And essentially, everyone's taking transit or taking a bike as opposed to driving everywhere. And because the weather patterns have changed, I amped up how we get fog on the mountain here a lot. Denny ends up living in the numbered streets, like near where I live, and they end up calling it Cloud City because it's so foggy all the time because of the weather changes. There's so much precipitation and fog that it's just always foggy. And I had a really great like urban decay bar called the War Zone that's using really sort of broken down wind and solar technology to get credits and stay off the radar. So it's very fun. At one point, I have my main characters Denny and her friend Jordan go down the Jolly Cut, a really decaying Jolly Cut on their bike. And so they're just speeding down this thing going, whoa, there's a crack in the pavement, and of course they visit the Dundurn Castle area several times. And I worked some Hamilton history into it as well because I have her talking to fictionalized people from the rail bridge disaster that happened down by Dundurn Castle in the 19th century, and also the ship that came in with typhoid that they had to keep in the harbor. at one point in the 19th century as well. So she talks to some of the ghosts from that time period because Tessa's pulling them up, unfortunately, and making them unrestful. But I worked real history into it. Fictionalized people, real history. So that's kind of what I did.
Yeah, I've used Hamilton quite a lot in my own work. In an upcoming one, Revenant, well, in my Chronicles of Ray McAndrews is my modern day wizard. And basically he's a monster hunter. That's the scenario. But he's also lives in Hamilton. And in the first book, it's not as apparent. Most of the action takes place in either St. Catharines or Toronto, although there are some sequences in Hamilton. But he actually lives in the Hamilton apartment I used to live in. And book 2 of the series is Revenant, which has a lot of Hamilton content. I get into a lot of the stuff in the Hamilton area, like the Grindstone Creek Trail area. And I have a lot of action taking place there, as well as the surrounding graveyards. And it kind of pointed out one of the problems that you can run into, where I was calling it the marsh walk, because that's what I call it, and that's what everybody I know calls it, because you're walking in the marsh. And my editor took quite affront to the fact that, no, that's not the proper name of it. So it was kind of this conflict of local color and, you know, what the legitimate name of it is. And considering that I'm hoping to sell to people outside of Hamilton, I decided to go with the legitimate name. But that's the sort of thing that you can run into. Does anybody else, well, Moya, do you have any work that's in the Hamilton area? Or?
Not exactly in the Hamilton area. I'm working on a piece that is around Niagara Falls. It's kind of a historical, and it's looking at spiritualism and technology at the turn of the 20th century, and it's a bit of a ghost story, obviously. So right now I'm looking at the history of the War of 1812, and I'm kind of looking at different characters that would have been around that time. So I'm not exactly in the Hamilton area, but I am sort of down by
it's
Falls.
GHA.
Yeah,
you know,
so it's Niagara Falls, Niagara on the Lake.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Stony Creek has the, if you ever wanted to come by for the annual recreation of the
definitely.
Battle of Stony Creek, that would probably be a good immersive history for you.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that I do. I write about Canadian history, especially military. So this has kind of taken me down a really interesting research rabbit hole. Yeah. But right now I'm totally immersed in looking at uniforms and the military behavior of the War of 1812, and just sort of the way people were interacting, especially the reactions of the non-combatants and the use of technology to see if it could be augmented in spiritual seances type of thing, because there was a real big interest in that. So there's a lot of different things around that particular area that I'm working on right now.
Okay. And Kathy, do you have anything that you'd like to kick in? I guess not. Okay.
Can I pop in for 2 seconds? Moira, if you haven't been to the Mayhome Foundation, maybe give them a call. My dad's one of the people that runs it, and it's really good local history resource and archive down in Niagara. So I think you guys would get along.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
So what was the name of the foundation?
The Mayhome Foundation, Mayhome. It's just at the end of Ontario Street, down by Wright Brothers in St. Catharines.
Okay, I'll take a look at them online. Thank you for the hint. That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you.
Oh, by the way, I'm going to recommend that everybody click on chat and put in your website or buy link, some way that people can follow up on your books. That's just a good bit general business practice. Now, one of the things I think there are some great advantages to writing in the Hamilton area. For one thing, it is incredibly culturally diverse. And I'm wondering if anybody else has really kind of enjoyed that. Because, you know, one of the things I love about Hamilton is if I want to eat Ethiopian, there's an Ethiopian restaurant just down the mountain from me. Any kind of cuisine that you want, you can probably find. So has anybody else sort of tackled that thing of, yeah, this wonderful, the world's at your doorstep aspect that you can get in Hamilton? Who else, anybody else played with that?
Well, I ran into that a little bit. It was possibly a less diverse city in the period I was writing about, 1957, but at the same time, there were a lot of different people from a lot of different places having moved into the city. And I do have some references to things that surprise people. But that's one of the things that I do like about Hamilton is that a lot of people from outside the city have a kind of monotone idea of what the city is all about, and typically they would drive across the Skyway and see, you know, the industrial area, and that's their impression. But when you really get into it and look around, there are a lot of really interesting corners and different things going on, and I find it really just expands as time goes on. So it's become, I always thought it was an interesting place, but it's become even more interesting in that aspect. There are so many different kinds of people doing different things in the city.
Yeah. Like part of what I love about it, because I'm writing in that paranormal metaphysical, is I can access all sorts of different cultures. I mean, my first book in the series is Nuki Kubai, which is a Japanese goblin, a yare. And, you know, why not? Because there are loads of Japanese people that live in the area, and you can access that. And, you know, we've got the whole first peoples mythos simply by being here. That can be accessed and used respectfully. That's what I think is the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation is, are we respectful to the source material? That's where I don't cotton to this thing of, if you happen to be of Asian descent, you can't write something that's European. We're all human. But it's a matter of showing respect. And I very deliberately switched that out of the more traditional way of wording it to show my point. War of 1812, you know, Moya, you're all over that, and there's huge amount that can be done with that. Liz, have you kind of hit that multicultural theme in your work at all?
So not exactly, but I mean, I think one of the things I really like about Hamilton, and the reason I chose it as a setting for my book even before I lived here, because I had it picked out way before I moved here, way before I'd even moved out of St. Catharines, because I'm kind of a transplant here from St. Catharines by way of Oakville. I just sort of looped around, and you know, but I think what got me about Hamilton is I love the aesthetic of Hamilton, like just is this kind of clutter of all different people and stories and backgrounds, and just like it, there's layer upon layer of history there, and you kind of see time period upon time period sort of layered in the signage and the facades on the buildings and the way things are laid out. I love that aesthetic. Like I just want to draw it all the time. I think Hamilton is just so beautiful and amazing for that. Just the layers of history that you can see right in front of you. And the layers of culture that you can see right in front of you, and just how incredibly wonderful and quirky and yes, diverse it is. So in a lot of the traveling around kind of scenes, I did sort of highlight that there was, all these interesting businesses next to one another, and it was sort of this pleasant jumble of things. And I think it was sort of in the background of my work, but it's there.
Okay, and Kathy?
Like I say, it was very brief, my mention in my story, so I really haven't explored that.
Okay. Well, another nice thing, I have notes that I'm going from, and anybody is welcome to pitch in and diverge from that. But I find a little structure can keep things rolling. Geographically diverse. I mean, in a very small area, you have forests, you have beaches, farms, golf courses, the whole escarpment cutting the city in half. And I know I've played with that geography, having my well, in the book Revenant, which should be out this year, and it's currently in editing with the publisher. I utilize the Grindstone Creek area, and I also utilize the Arboretum as a couple of the major settings. And in the third book, which is Lefrakant, I start off on the what's its name? It's at the end of the Centennial Parkway, but it's the beach, which I've actually swum at on several occasions, and I make a great deal out of the fact that there is a strange undertow at that beach that it builds up and it tries to pull you away from the shore. Because if you're a distance swimmer, obviously when you're training, you're swimming parallel to the shore. And I've been a distance. Anytime I get into shape, I'm a distance swimmer. Let's put it that way. But the reality is there is this current that sucks you out. And I kind of added an occult boost to that, and had my lifeguard wizard having to face off against a Kelpie that has dragged him out into the lake. So how, well, Mark, you've obviously used Hamilton extensively. How have you fooled around with the variety that the area can offer?
Well, the chief characters in the book are a couple of young fellows who like to go around and see different places, and I made use of that. Of course, they visit a number of places in and around the city, and enjoy describing them. I think Hamilton is really one of the more spectacular settings for a city in the entire country. And one of the things that's interesting about it, I think, for me anyway, is that a lot of the small geographic areas and their physical characteristics are very much tied up with the city's history, or portions of the city's history, so that you go to the bayfront, there are certain things that have happened in the past. You go to the middle of the city, there's all of that Victorian architecture, and and in some areas, aspects of modern architecture from the 1930s to the 50s. You go to the well, the Red Hill Creek area, the name of the book there, it's not only a natural area, now somewhat less natural than it used to be, but you're right on the edge of a major battle in the War of 1812, and of course there's the whole aspect of how anywhere you go really in the city, you're looking at historical change. It used to be all a farm area, then it became an industrial area, and the residential areas spread out, and even the farming areas have changed from what they were. A lot more vineyards, if there was any agriculture that survived. So there's just a richness in the physical setting and the things that the physical setting evokes that I just find it endlessly interesting.
Liz?
Absolutely. I think that the geographical setting of Hamilton is, beautiful and interesting, and it's almost like if you made it up, people wouldn't believe you, because it's got a beach and it's got a big cliff and it's got, all of these different styles of architecture and everything. And it's just, I don't know. I think Hamilton is a really, I think it's like underappreciated as a place that has kind of an epic scope of geographical interest. I especially like the mountain brow. That's one of my favorite places to go and just look at the city and enjoy, just how beautiful it is, and how grand in scale. But that's why I had my characters go down the Jolly Cut on their bikes, and of course I loved Under Castle area too, and I kind of had, a lot of the old growth trees, and have Denny reminisce about getting her butt bit by one of the geese in the botanical garden. Yeah, Stephen,
Actually, I don't really get this thing of people being troubled by Canadian geese, because I have a basic rule with wildlife. I leave them alone, they leave me alone.
Okay,
And if
let
they
me
don't
explain
leave
though.
me, sorry?
So there's this part where you're walking around in the botanical gardens, in the area where you go and feed the chickadees and stuff.
Yep.
And the trail goes down through this little marshy bit. And the geese are really dumb, and they like to put their nests too close to the path. And so you could be minding your own business, walking down this path, going through this marshy business, and you will see Daddy Goose coming out in the middle of the path being like, and then your choice is either you're going back the way you came, or you're trying to thread the needle and you're going to get your butt bit.
Yeah, you see, with me, I think it's just, I'm not the nicest person when somebody threatens me, man or animal. And I think that it's, with a lot of animals, it's who's more aggressive. And once you push me, I become very aggressive, and I do so with animals as well as people. The exception to this is something much bigger than me, like a bear.
I know somebody who actually forced a swan to bail out at the Oakville Marina, because he puffed out his jacket and rushed the thing, and it just bailed.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm talking about, this sort of attitude. So, I've never had trouble with these, because I think they just realize that he's more of a piece of work than I am.
See, I had a peanut butter sandwich that I was eating as I was walking one day, and a swan attacked me for my peanut butter sandwich, and that was amazing. He was really aggressive.
Swan mugger.
I've been really lucky, because York University has a flock of geese that they don't migrate. They stick around. Doesn't matter how much snow we have on the ground. These geese are bopping around. I have to walk to work, and they just kind of like look at me like, they're okay and they can get really close to me. They started following me one day, but I didn't have any food on me. And I turned around and I heard this guy yelling, and the geese were attacking him. They left me alone. I guess I have good goose foo. I don't know. But yeah, you're right, Liz. The geese are dumb. They're really dumb. But these guys stick around all year round. They don't migrate at all. So
One of the things I love about the Hamilton area is you can do almost any kind of story, because you look at it, we have a world-class university. So if you want to do the weird experiment gone bad kind of storyline, it's perfect setting for it, because you've got the excuse for the weird experiment. We have a nuclear reactor, a breeder reactor, admittedly. It's probably the safest nuclear reactor in Canada, which is kind of like saying the least dangerous bear in the park. But we have a nuclear reactor there, so you can do radiation gone bad stories. Lake Ontario, with some limitations, you can do lost at sea stories. There's actually one that an idea that I saw that I'd love to do a screenplay on. A couple of people got marooned in the lake on jet skis, and the 2 jet skis went down, and they were left bobbing there overnight. And I mean, the great room for a script, for a cheap script there. Also a network through all sorts of other things. And has anybody thought of using the festivals as a setting? I know that I used Art Crawl in the short story in Love, Time, Space, and Magic. But has anybody else played with that? Oh,
No.
okay.
I like to. I love festival settings. I wrote one set in the Virgil Stampede one time. So, why not a Hamilton festival? That would be fun too. Oh wait, nope. I set one at Rib Fest, and it was a Rib Fest that's up on the mountain near me. So there you go, and that one actually got published. So
Excellent.
I wrote this story. It's all in the sauce, and it's about heartbreak and Rib Fest, and essentially it's a short story about a person who gets their heart broken. I never tell you the gender. And the person who gets their heart broken, and they just want the heartache to end so badly that they sell their feelings to a group of nomadic barbecue chefs who are taking people's emotions and putting them into the barbecue sauce so that people will react more strongly to the barbecue sauce.
that's awesome.
And in return, thank you. And in return, my vegetarian character becomes a total carnivore. That was the trade-off.
As it should be. Meat. Meat.
The tagline was, sometimes a new problem is as good as a solution.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's in A Quiet Afternoon anthology, if anybody's ever interested. It's a digital anthology.
Okay. Now, kind of covered the advantages. Now, some of the disadvantages of using Hamilton as a setting, because there's a degree of work in all of this. One that I've run into in using real places, and I use a lot of real places in my work, is the ever changing. And you kind of alluded to this, Mark, that the city has changed over time and does change over time. So what you've written becomes dated. I know I think it was the Vampire Dentist movie or something like that. It was done by Christine. She's a local film producer, and it's become a heritage film because she shot at Engage Park, with the old botanical garden, old greenhouse and old buildings, and those are gone now. So how do you cope with the changes? Do you just not worry about it?
That was one of the things that emerged as a big surprise by the time I finished the book, because the main character starts out as someone who's actually rather worried about the prospect of change. He worries about how people change and they may become different persons than what you might have thought they were, which is especially potentially for him a problem in a relationship. But I realized as I was going along that change was becoming a really important sub-theme in the story, because there was change going on everywhere I looked at. The characters were starting to do different things, having different visions of their future. They were learning more about themselves, and there were a number of references that crept into the way that the city had changed, and the way that certain historical events and had taken place and locations had changed. And in fact, as I looked back through some old materials to see exactly where certain things were and what they had looked like, I was surprised at the amount that of information that I hadn't known about. I thought I knew a lot about Hamilton, but the more I looked into it, the more I realized, wow, there are a whole bunch of things that have gone on in the city that I really hadn't been aware of, and some on a fairly large scale. It did worry me a bit that having put a story in 1957, even though it was written by a character who was looking back at that time, that it was dated in some respects, and the city has changed a lot over the last half century. I think there's a much bigger arts community, a much bigger technology community, the growth of the health center, for example, at the university. So it became a part of the story, and a much bigger part than I would have expected. In some respects, of course, that was difficult to deal with, but in other respects, it was part of depicting a really interesting city, that there's this constant emergence, a churn of both people and events.
Okay. Liz, you ever been caught out by one of your setting changes? Not necessarily in Hamilton.
Yeah, actually. So there are things that I wanted to put in distant early warning that ended up getting taken out at the last minute because of the new Brock Arts Center that went in, that like a quarter of downtown got demolished. So, and a lot of the businesses changed around and things like that. So I had to reconfigure my descriptions in the opening scene a little bit, because, they just weren't there anymore and it wasn't accurate anymore. Luckily, I've been pretty lucky, and I think the reason being, I use a lot of real places for throwaway references. But if it's something the plot is hinging on, I typically do a lot of research on what could be there and then make something up. So that way, nothing that the plot is hinging on, anybody's gonna go, well, that's not there anymore, So, I mean, I could just go alternate history, but yeah, if it's a major hinging plot point, I usually make it up.
Kathy, not necessarily in Hamilton. Have you had used a real place and had it change on you?
I think no matter what city, wherever you're going to be, you're going to have changes happening. So I did use a lot of Toronto, but my story started in the present and went into the future. So it was easier to make things a little different. Like the Royal Ontario Museum was still there, but there was a massive condo with these massive terraces across the street type of thing. And so because it was in the future, I was able to alter things a bit.
Mhm.
So, but the iconic places like the Rogers Center or Sky Dome or whatever you want to call it, you have to pick a name, or you have to reference back to a name or forward to a name, something like that.
You see, that was something that's something that I also do to kind of compensate. If it's something that has like a recognizable name that's associated with the brand and it changes hands, I always make up a name for it. Like, I have Canada's Wonderland in the ground that grows roses, but I've named it Magical Mountain Vaughan because it's changed hands a bunch of times since, and then gone out of business and then turned into a gang hangout and then, abandoned. So,
It's
so Magical
also
Mountain Vaughan.
it's also just plain safer to do that because of copyright. And you don't want to use somebody's brand name. I know that I referenced a Tim Hortons that actually exists, but I had, as actually happens, working girls taking men into the bathroom. And I didn't think that Tim Hortons Corporation would consider that a complimentary depiction. So it got turned into the donut shop.
Yeah, I
But,
don't think Hooker Harvey's would like that very much either. Hooker Harvey's.
I was just thinking about that.
Yeah.
But everybody knows it as Hooker Harvey's.
Mhm.
So it's become quite the joke now, but
yeah, it's just, there's a certain degree of not wanting to run afoul of these corporations that can actually afford lawyers. Well, Moira, you come at it from the other end because you're writing historical, War of 1812, and so much has changed since then. Do you have any
yes.
Insights or things you like to comment on?
Really good question. Because I'm focusing on certain events, when you've got a battleground that had so much interaction, there was a lot of change, but there's a lot of things that stayed the same. So I have to be careful about that, because the landscape was definitely changing and the border was definitely changing and the belligerents were changing. But we could still situate it in a part of history that you kind of go, okay, these are accepted, proven facts, but we all know that not every part of the facts are actually in a book or in a history book, because there's always things that are being found. Because one sites I came to was talking about how some equipment was found just a couple of weeks ago, or there's bits and pieces of horseshoes, and so the landscape keeps changing with the discoveries that are being made. So we have something that situates the history, but then as people become more interested and as the population changes, the approach to finding new facts do change. So it's for me, it's kind of a way to go around these things, because you have to be careful. Right now I'm trying to figure out something about Sir Isaac Brock. Some places have him identified as Major General, some places have him as Brigadier General. At one point, did he change his title? I got to be very, very careful about that, because he is a very famous historical figure. So I'm being very careful about what sources I look at. But I guess, the more things change, the more they stay the same in many ways, maybe.
I think with people, I'd agree with you. Human nature doesn't change, just the trappings around us.
Yes.
I actually had one that was kind of comes at it. It's not in Hamilton at all. It actually is in England. But I have in my Norse Fantasy Viking Adventure series, the Bastard Prince saga. In book 2 of that, the Mistletoe Spear, I have them traveling up the Orse River and through a whole series of adventures and conflicts and so forth. The Orse, I needed to divert north of its current course. And when I did the research, it turns out that back in the 900s, when the book is set, the river actually did run north of its current course. And in the 1200s, they cut a channel to shorten the time that it took to get from Jorvik to the sea, and shorten the Norse in the 1200s. So I actually moved that historical fact up a couple of centuries and made it a plot point in the novel. So, you know, it doesn't always make it harder. Sometimes it helps you. And, you know, utilizing Hamilton the same way, sometimes the changes help you. But a lot of the time I know with my own work, what I'll do is just, I will have a time that the work occurs. And that book is frozen in that time. Now, the human nature doesn't change, so human interactions are going to happen. But if anybody challenged me on it, it would be, no, back in 1980, that's what it was like. And you just go with that. I've already talked a little bit about local color versus actual names. So did anyone else run into that, or am I just an odd duck? Where everybody around you calls it a certain thing, but that's not its name. No? Okay.
Can't remember if I ran into that or not. I did wrestle with the concept of what referring to certain places might mean to any reader from outside the city who had never experienced it. But I just arbitrarily resolved that by saying, well, this is sort of a memoir by somebody who grew up there, and that's what I'm going to follow.
Yes. Yeah, I've always been a little hesitant about describing Barton Street as a crumbling urban wasteland.
I started to work for the Hamilton Public Library after a long teaching career. And one of my first assignments was at the Barton Street Library, talking about your hookers. We had a lot of that happening.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's a fact of life. There are places in any fairly large city that are going to be not as nice. And, you know, the Barton Street Business Association would love to pull up the area, but I think they kind of flounder and try to figure out how, which of course is a good plot point that you can work in as well. Okay. There's, I think she's left. Bummer. There is a woman that's supposed to be doing a reading later who did Walking the Streets of Hamilton, which kind of ties into the whole thing of tricks. You know, tricks you can use to try to utilize Hamilton or try to use lives of real place. And if you're a Hamilton local, that is one of the best. Just walk the street, direct experience. Another one that I've used extensively is Google Maps. I have a story in The Light Between Stars, which is part of in the same as my Tinker's World, and I can't even remember the name of the town. I'm horrible at that. but I've never been there. But I have gone over it with Google Maps, and because I'm setting it 200 years in the future, you can kind of go with the gross anatomy. Anybody else done stuff like that with Google Maps or any other form of map thing?
Yeah, I found that surprisingly useful. I didn't want to get really absorbed in research because I've read novels that are based on a lot of research, and at times it seems like the author wanted to cram in all the notes, at the expense of the story. But I wanted to have a high degree of accuracy in the physical descriptions I was using, and some of the locations. And I thought I was surprised to find online a couple of old maps from the period I was describing. They were a help. Just modern Google Street Views was a help. And I was also surprised to find really an amazing amount of material online put there by people who had posted old images of Hamilton just because they thought they were interesting, or in some cases they had been archived by the Hamilton Spectator. But for example, there's a fellow who some years ago posted a series of photographs of what the business areas of Kenilworth Street looked like. He just wanted to archive that. And at one point in the story, I have a couple of characters going to see a movie at the old Tivoli Theater downtown. And I'd been in there, and I remember really liking the theater, but for the life of me, I could not remember what it looked like inside. But I found online some old photographs of the interior, and it was a gorgeous theater. So there is a surprising amount of information available. I ended up referring to a number of things more from online sources than from written materials, and even to the point of surprisingly running into old city directories available online. So I was able to check a couple of addresses pretty closely to set places quite accurately. I did bend the rules somewhat on a few time periods, put things into the story that may have taken place in other years, but there was a lot of help online in terms of doing a proper physical setting description.
There's also, well, Kathy, you know about this, library archives. If you want to go out and get the stories that form a backdrop to a particular day or week or whatever.
The archives that Hamilton Library has are really extensive, and they're so helpful if you want to go in and look for something.
Yeah. Do they still do the microfilm newspapers, or has that all been digitized?
I think a lot of it's still on the microfiche, but they're gradually working to they've got so much stuff. It's a major project.
Yeah. One of the great things you can do, we touched on it already, was pick a local event and use that as your setting, because you've immediately got color. And you were saying that you did that with something, the Rib Fest.
Rib Fest, yes. That was really fun. It's fun to do stuff like that, because then it like gives the actual event or place a little more magic too. Like, I'd like to think that if I broke into Rib Fest after hours, it'd be some sort of weird, magical ritual going on to improve the sauce.
Yes, well, having worked in the recreation and worked at several fairgrounds and the like, I can say that there are certainly many incantations that get spoken as you are breaking down the fair, most of which cannot be repeated in polite company.
Oh Oh goodness. I had a temp job one time, putting up and taking down those bouncy castles. I think I have some idea.
Yeah. You call in the, often if you're taking down, you call in to question the parentage of the person who put up. And then you find out that, then you realize that, hold on, I put this one up.
Yeah, the only fun part is when everything's up and you're ushering people through. That's fun, you know. Like yeah, get like letting kids go down the bouncy slide, that's fun. Keeping the
Yep.
bees out, you know.
Well, you know, I honestly understand why so many people, number one, anybody who has dealt with the public come for very long comes to the conclusion that the public are idiots. Then you realize if you deal with them a little longer, not all the public are idiots. It's just there's about 10% of the public who are idiots. And they are so visible that they eclipse everything else.
They tend to be loud.
Yes. I can't resist, and this is as far as I'll go for politics. Honk, 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 honk.
And like the geese.
Yeah. Yes, well, please don't judge us by our